Welcome to The Call to Rise, the podcast for sacred rebels, visionaries, and conscious changemakers. Here we sit down with the people birthing the new earth, weaving ancient wisdom with modern strategy to build movements that heal, transform, and uplift our world. I'm Mackenzie Darling, your host, inviting you into honest conversations, practical tools, and hard-won wisdom to awaken your power and to inspire you to answer the call to rise and to meet this moment in history. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Amber McZeal, who is a writer, vocalist, sacred scholar, ancestral lineage healing practitioner, and activist. Amber utilizes sound therapy and guided somatic imagery to engage the knowledge of the body within an interactive and liberatory arts practice. In 2018, she launched her organization, Decolonizing the Psyche, where she weaves somatic praxis with Afro-Indigenous spiritual technologies and social justice, deep decoloniality in efforts to address cultural trauma, foster transformation, and create more humane and social relationships. Amber holds an MA in somatic depth psychology and a PhD in depth psychology with emphasis in community, liberation, indigenous, and ecological psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute in California. Welcome, Amber. It is so amazing to have you here.
Thank you, Mackenzie. It's lovely to be here.
Just to give our listeners a little bit of background, I actually worked personally with Amber when both of my parents passed away a couple years ago and really began diving deep into ancestral healing and wisdom. And so Amber was really a pivotal person for me during that difficult time. And I've asked Amber if it would be okay with her for her to open up the space, because I remember just what a beautiful ritualist and ceremonialist that she is. And so would you mind, Amber, guiding us and opening up the space to start things off?
Sure thing. So first, just taking a moment to acknowledge the gift of breath, a soft wind pulsing within our bodies, a gentle reminder that the body is indeed sacred, that form is sacred, offering a tone of heartfelt honor, gratitude, respect to that creative consciousness, the all that is, living life through each of us, permeating the many things, and to the beauty, the brilliance, and mystery of those many things returning back to a one, back to a source. In all that we do, may we be privileged to understand the flow and purpose of that cycle with each passing day, and to find some comfort in our places within it, the spirit of good relationality, acknowledging all of the animating powers, the animating spirits of those ancestors older than the human family. Homage to the spirits animating soil, earth, rock beneath our feet. Homage to the spirits of water, fresh and salt, that move across the earth, mirroring the waters that flow in our very bodies. Homage to the spirits of wind and air that restore equilibrium to our ecosystems. Homage to the primordial firekin who carry the spirit of courage, of justice, and remind us it's okay to change. Thank you to all of our Egun, our wise, beloved ancestors who've shown the light on each of our paths, who support us and walk beside us as we step into it, as we walk it each day. And may the works we do, the rituals we enact, generate a frequency of inner harmony that echoes throughout the world like a song. That I say, Ashe.
Ashe, amen. Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. So
Absolutely.
beautiful. Yeah. Well, Amber, when I was saying before, when I first started Movement Maker, you were one of the first people that I reached out to because I had this deep calling from spirit, from source, that you had such medicine for my community and for the world. And so I'd love to start off with your organization, and your calling is around this decolonizing the psyche. I understand that from my own perspective and my own thoughts, but I always love to start off with, from the teacher's lips. How do you envision that, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah. Well, if I may, I'll just take a moment to briefly introduce myself.
Please.
building on the bio, because it does inform decolonizing the psyche. In fact, it's the seed. So I'm from Louisiana originally, though I live in the Bay, and my people date back in those lands to the 1700s. They came through Haiti, and before that, parts of West Africa, Nigeria, Mali, Senegal, some Central. I also have ancestors from the Iberian Peninsula and France predominantly. And when they landed in Turtle Island, the United States, they commingled with the Chitimacha indigenous tribe in the southeastern United States. So growing up in Louisiana, I actually had an opportunity to one, experience hurricanes every year, which I love, reverence to the awe and power of nature. I would often go outside and play in those. And this is the 20th anniversary of one well-known hurricane called Katrina. Katrina impacted my life. I had the opportunity to talk with a journalist for the 20th anniversary a few weeks back, and it was both cathartic and revelatory in that I made the connection finally from the body unconscious into conscious awareness that Katrina was really the catalyst for decolonizing the psyche on multiple levels, covering many, many layers, from the ecological crisis that we're living with, the warming of our earth and the waters, which generated a bigger storm, larger than we had seen. However, the storm wasn't the major impact to the cultural rupture that happened. That came in the wake of the storm, and even after the waters receded. The part of the cultural trauma that descended on my community, on myself, was through the will of human beings, through the policies that they enacted, through the eminent domain that they employed to seize land, through the choices made around whose lives deserved to be protected or cared for and whose did not, through the forced exile. Many public housing residences were boarded up and shut down, and folks were forced to leave the city. That tearing of community done through choices by human beings, the fellow human family, is what generated the trauma. I ended up diving into social justice work when I relocated to the Bay Area, mainly around the right to return, part of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And it was something I couldn't name, which is why I went to school for so long. I eventually found the language to articulate what I was witnessing within the minds, the hearts, the mouths of the people I encountered. Red Cross, Catholic Charities, etc., you name it. Mm-hmm. Decolonizing the psyche, to frame it differently, to be decolonial is to make whole, to repair and suture what is fractured. And psyche could be translated to soul. So part of the wounding of this modern era of modernity is our disconnection from soul, our the disenchantment of life, of the way that we organize life, the social agreements that we buy into or say yes to. And that manifests in the choices we make. So there's holy respect to the people on front lines doing that work, using the theater of protests, using whatever tools they have at their disposal and within their orbit. And in order to sustain change, there must be, what decolonizing the psyche is all about, there must be an inner transformation too, one that reconnects us with the soul of self, the soul of the collective human family, of the more than human family, of the rest of life, like the earth as sentient, the waters as alive. So that's what that's about. And that's what my work is focused on.
It's quite the work, and you definitely have your work cut out for you. Thank you so much for unpacking that for us. I've never actually heard anyone say the theater of protest, but that's an interesting way of saying that.
Yeah, and our ancestors were thespians too, in their own way. Before there was theater, there was ritual. Mm-hmm. And it was performed in the temple. All of that, the gesture, the movement, the attention to detail and composition, the harmony making of a mandala, that's involved in the mandala. Ritual is the sacred word for it. theater is our new world word for it, right? What I found though, and what basically fried my nervous system, the theater of protest is very hot. It is conjuring the element of fire. I mean, even if you think of a theater, all the lighting design that goes into it, in order to give life to the imaginal within a playwright, a poet, whatever it may be, a musician, and fire burns quickly. So it has a role to play, the theater of protest.
Absolutely.
It is not sustainable forever. And you will often see the rotations, right? Of people, they're going to the front line and then they're taking a seat back and other folks come in. There's that piece. There's the agency that is reclaimed when people do participate in the theater of protest, where one feels powerless and voiceless, they can take to the street and reverse that with one pivot. There's the mirror neuron impact. Folks witnessing the theater of protest are also affected, right? Through that mirroring of experience and the sensation and emotion, the neurochemicals that flow through the body. So it has a function for sure.
Absolutely.
I think we're saturated with heat, however, these days. And so all of nature, every indigenous spiritual technology, the cosmologies that I tap into, my practice being Isheshe out of Yoruba land, Nigeria, Vodun out of Haiti, they all center on balance. So where there is too much heat, you have to bring in the coolness.
I keep saying that I truly think that our biggest spiritual work is to find the balance in everything, the masculine and the feminine, the ancient wisdom and the modern strategy, right? To find that equilibrium within ourselves is so important. And I'm wondering what would be your advice for the movement makers out here that are trying to make a change and trying to find that balance within themselves? How do you be in right relationship with both your body and also the calling and your purpose that you're here to do?
Ooh, that's a big question.
It sure is. It sure is.
To be honest, I work best through the portal of intimacy. So really understanding the change road an individual is walking or their collective helps me articulate or transmit what the balance would be. But going back to what I mentioned with the theater of protest and our saturation with heat. One thing I'll lift up is spiritual activism. It is the turn that I made when I sat down my participation in organizing post-Katrina. It was definitely the pull that brought me to ancestral medicine and fueled the saying yes to becoming a lineage healing practitioner. Attending one's inner world, being able to notice sensation takes a certain quietude. You have to pay attention, and we're distracted. Even our technology is heat. It's all light. It's all fire. It's firing constantly. So I would lift that up to a broad group of people who are change agents, is consider spiritual activism and explore what that would mean for you. How does one incorporate the devotion and tending of their inner world in their cultural change efforts?
I think that's so spot on. And I hadn't really used the term spiritual activism before, but that's really what I'm trying to do with Movement Maker. I was telling you before that I've created this 6-month Movement Maker incubator where I teach and train new activists how to build movements using modern strategy and ancient wisdom. And the first 4 modules, I begin with the connection to source and how they can become a good steward to their movement through channeling the divine and being connected to source. Then going into ancestral wisdom as really the bedrock of the blueprint, as I mentioned before. I think that understanding your ancestry is strategy because it's bloodline to blueprint of what you're here to offer and the reparations and gifts and wisdom that you can bring forward. And then the next is around energy management, really getting, in tune with your soma and balancing that calling and your humanity in a really balanced way instead of burning out and from that fire, like you're saying. And then the last is looking at power structures, how we are holding our own power and looking at the power structure, the colonized structures that have been, swimming in our stew since we can remember. I bring all of that up because what you're talking about, that is all spiritual activism. And I think that for me, that is the foundation of movement building. You cannot, nor should you, move forward into movement building until you really have those looked at in a deep way. If you at least want to be the servant leader that's in integrity with your calling. So I would love to unpack some of that and what you think of all of that. I know it's a lot to cover.
We can give it a good college try,
Let's
as
do
they
a
say.
good old college try. Yeah, I love it. I want to pause for a quick moment. If what we're talking about today resonates with you, you'll want to check out the Movement Maker Incubator, my 6-month intensive where I guide sacred rebels and changemakers to birth their own movements using ancient wisdom and modern strategy. You can join the waitlist and learn more about this sacred rite of passage for changemakers at globalmovementmaker.com/incubator.
So as you were speaking, and again, congratulations on birthing this vision, and may it be well resourced and blessed. May it touch in generative ways the people who participate. As you were speaking it, what came to mind in the spirit of wholeness making and not siloing present experience from the past, which is what coloniality does. Colonialism, the invention of races, which is just a hierarchy of who's human and who is not, is all about separation. In order for the Irish to leave, to escape their lot within the early formation of the United States, they had to enter into a new category, a new identity, which we call white. In order to enter into that new identity, along with the Italians and everybody else, they had to relinquish their European identity or ancestral card. So in what you're describing, what we are living with now, the systems we are living with now, are the ancestors in the present moment. They're not dead.
Right.
Even though they have transitioned. The legacy is what lives on. The choices made is what lives on. The inheritances passed around is what lives on, right? That turning back in the Akan tradition out of Ghana, they call it Sankofa, and it's symbolized by a bird that's flying forward, but it's turning its head backwards to catch an egg on its back. And the medicine within that symbol is, in order to move forward, as you're saying, into the blueprint, I have to look back. I have to know what I came from. Right. I have to understand what I've inherited and why. In all of its blessings and challenges, and there are both. There are resiliences, there's wisdom, there's genius, and there are burdens and harms as well. Those inform what we construct or co-construct in the future. So the way it lands when you describe the modules is that it's taking movement or social change efforts and placing an animist lens on it, reconnecting the dots of past with present, guiding everyone forward. And that's what we call holistic.
Yes, I think holistic is a beautiful and perfect word for it. And I also think that, speaking of birds, I think that it brings more of a bird's eye view. From my own healing journey, I was in talk therapy for years and years and years, and there's definitely still a place for talk therapy, absolutely. But it wasn't until I started doing the ancestral healing and starting to connect on a higher spiritual level where I was able to start to commune with the unseen world and starting to see that holistic picture of both, let me not just look backwards from family, immediate family, but now my entire ancestral family. And then let me look at, the generations that are coming 200 years from now. And then all of a sudden you have this much larger perspective that really has you thinking more holistically on every decision that you're making. I think, something that I keep saying around the difference between building a movement and building a business. So building a business is just profit, bottom line, customer, what are we selling today? And movements are, okay, how do I co-create with community to dream into the future, and what legacy are we leaving?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. As you're saying that, business and profit-driven models of change, social change. If I may, I'll offer a practical example of how ancestors inform the offerings around cultural change and cultural shift. What you just articulated really well about that bottom line driving all
Yep.
of your choices, right? And your partnerships and everything. I just set out into the world something called Value Reformations. And it's a series, Decolonizing the Psyche 2025 series. And it was born from reckoning with and reconciling the experiences of my ancestors who harvested crops for free.
Mhm.
So the extraction of life force on one hand, the extraction of earth resource on the other, co-created a distorted value system, along with a bunch of other things, right? And to your point, many of us are still driven by that logic,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So it wasn't until this actually came through in 2019, I offered a DTP um, series with public health in San Francisco on sugar and decoloniality. Because they tax sugar around the country, but they collect the taxes and then they distribute grants to local community orgs who are trying to shift eating habits and things like that. And as I'm preparing it and researching it, my ancestors who harvested sugarcane in Haiti and Louisiana were coming to me in dreams, and they were coming to me in meditation, and they were showing me all of these other dimensions, not just about their hardship. And I think that's really key in presenting this invitation to folks, but around the pathway to restoring right relationship, right? So it's through the firewall of that trauma, the extractive capitalism, the disposability of bodies, etc. It's through the firewall of that hardship that honestly the details of one strategy of repair become clear. They crystallize in a way. You know, hearing the voice of nature, which these are old technologies, these are old indigenous technologies. Hearing the voice of nature when it says enough, like monocultures, monocrops, right? No, stop growing just that same thing. We need diversity because diversity is what keeps the ecosystem, you know. So the ancestors start to partner with the spirits of land and place to elevate the wisdom that has been forcibly pushed into the subaltern, into the unconscious or underground. That move of forcing it underground and unconscious is what sustains the bottom line drive, right? Engine. So yeah, the value system, transforming it.
Yeah, we definitely need to be transforming it. And it's hard because that requires us to slow down, which is in the exact opposition of what has been valued most in this capitalistic rat race as you're talking what you're talking about. And at the heart of movements are value systems. You
Yeah.
can't have a movement without having really, really articulated your values. And you're seeing this within, the far right and the far left. They have very, very, very different value systems. And so, how do you see the road to repair to get us to the right value systems?
Yeah. You know, as you were speaking that, the words that popped out were urgency.
It
And
does feel urgent. Yeah.
no, it is. It's a
Mhm.
straight up slave driver of the psyche. It's
Yep.
not even, it's why heart disease is off the charts, among other things. But the word urgency next to the word movement. And
Mhm.
so, as you asked, they're both driving forward.
Yes.
My subtle shift would be when you describe the left and the right have different values. Not only are movements centered around values, culture is centered around values, right?
Absolutely.
So the way I hold it is I'm actually talking about cultural change, and
Absolutely.
I'm moving around that as in Vodou they call it the potomitan, the center pole that all of the initiates move and dance around. So the potomitan, the center pole, is culture,
Mhm.
right? And embedded in that, constructing it is are the layers of values. Practical example, what's it called? White replacement theory, and the fear that's driving a lot of folks on the right. The idea that they're going to go extinct. Like, where did this actually come from? Within the language of depth psychology, we call that a cultural complex. It is an unhealed, untended, unmetabolized wound of annihilation.
Correct. Yep. Correct.
That's what it is. They're not lying.
Mm-hmm.
They actually feel something, but finding the root cause of that sensation, speaking of slowing down, they're not resourced quite yet in order to identify and locate the root source of that sensation. It's not Mexicans.
Right.
It certainly isn't Black people. We've been here with y'all the whole time. Like, we're entangled. We're in a relationship in this particular United States project. So clearly you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So rather than, and this is a critique for the left and, some of the rebels and rabble-rousers, an alternative approach, rather than denigrating them, saying they're illogical, whatever, fanatical, what does it look like to turn toward that expression with a compassionate ear, listening for something that's beneath the surface of their cultural expression in the moment? The cultural expression is 4chan and all of these fringe, dark web, you name it, sects and groups, right? And the narrative of white replacement. That's the dominant narrative. What's the sub-narrative? That's where ancestors come in. That's where bigger powers come in. That's where the earth itself that we're all standing on and in relationship with comes in. So centering the cultural lens, cultural change as the goal, cultural trauma healing as the process. For me, what comes up is, for those French ancestors of mine, what about the Inquisition? What about feudalism? What about sophisticated torture campaigns, public torture campaigns, as a psychic residue within an ancestral lineage? How might that inform the narrative underneath that's coming out in the dominant waves? And I'll work with you from there.
I would love for you to talk about that repair process, what that entails and how people can get more involved in what the stages are for that. Every episode of the Call to Rise podcast is about the changemakers and movements reshaping our world. But the podcast is just the beginning. On my Substack, I open the door wider, sharing my personal journey with movement makers, the wins, the struggles, and the behind-the-scenes rituals that help leaders birth what's next. If you're ready to go deeper into the frameworks and practices you hear me hint at here, join me at globalmovementmaker.substack.com.
Yeah, sure. So first, it's important to name that ancestral reverence practices is not new by any stretch of the imagination. They're one of the oldest spiritual technologies, if we want to use that framing, known to the human family. They exist in different manifestations cross-culturally for a really long time. The approach that I've learned and what I've been trained in, the certified practitioner process, is through ancestral medicine. The founders, a fellow by the name of Dr. Daniel Four. So the first piece is all of what I'm going to describe in a short amount of time it's in the book, Ancestral Medicine, that he wrote. And that's what this approach is rooted in. So I really honor him for saying yes to this call, because I believe what I've experienced through my own process with it and sharing it with others is it is uniquely suited for the cultural rift we're in right now. It's accessible enough, it's linear enough in a way, yet informed by the old ones, informed by older traditions, some Eastern mystic traditions, shamanic practices, some West African religious practices, some Sufi Islamic practices, among others. So the work is grounded in some cross-cultural agreements. And I'll start with the first. One is that something exists after we die. Cross-culturally, among most indigenous groups, they agree. Tibetan Book of the Dead, Egyptian Book of the Dead, you name it, they all agree and have a way of describing that. But consciousness continues after death. The second cross-cultural assumption is that not all the dead are equally well when they die. So just dying doesn't make you a saint. It doesn't make you benevolent. or even a source of wisdom or insight for your descendants. Given what I described about European cultural traumas, for most of us living in the West, living in the modern moment, our people did not carry forward those rituals and practices and ceremonies that would assist souls to become well. There are rites of passage that have existed for a long time. In fact, that's what the Tibetan Book of the Dead is all about. It's actually not translated as that. It's called the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. It's basically teaching you these are the stages that you will go through. We're going to give you the heads up so you're not so surprised when you cross over and you can continue the journey, right? But part of the colonial project required the erasure of those violently in most cases. So we end up with a lot of wandering ghosts, a lot of dead souls who don't have direction or support or connection. This is where the ancestral trauma, unmetabolized ancestral trauma, intersects with cultural trauma that intersects with intergenerational trauma. So things left undone, untended within an ancestral line can easily trickle down and start to move through the lives of the living. I think we're seeing a heck of a lot of that right now. I name a few hot spots on the earth, but we don't have to. So not all the dead are equally well. The third agreement is we're entangled. We have a pact with the dead and they have one with us. We impact them and they impact us. I described it in the not so generative way with inherited ancestral trauma. And when change is effected, they can also impact us really well. You know, engaging in the lineage healing practice, those ancestors from Europe have been some of my most profound allies in cultural change work. And that leads to the final agreement is that the dead can change. And this is the liberatory arc of the practice. Even those who have committed great harm, and none of us are exempt, even those of us who have ancestors who endured great harm, things can transform. They can be alchemized and integrated. They can become sources of wisdom and guidance as opposed to burdens that debilitate us. So within the book, along with courses offered by Ancestral Medicine and practitioners who offer sessions one-on-one, like you described us partnering in, we support people through a process of coming into deeper relationship with their well and vibrant ancestors to heal cultural and intergenerational trauma. That's what we do.
Beautiful. I really want to plug you and your work. You are an amazing practitioner, and I'm just such a believer in this work. I think that as a movement, I think that is the movement to get more people into doing this work. I'm wondering, several times you mentioned dream work, and I know from my own practices and really starting to pay attention to my dreams, my ancestors come and talk to me all the time. As an entheogenic minister, I often can commune with my ancestors within connection through plant allies. And so I'm wondering, what are different ways and advice that you would give to movement makers that are feeling called to step into leadership and bring in an ally within their movement building, and how to really start connecting in that place?
Yeah, well, bliss to the dreams. I'm a big fan. You already know.
Absolutely.
So, dreams are a primary site of connection and communication between our ancestors and the living. I have my assumptions about it, and as I'm learning more, especially about the role of dreams in my spiritual tradition, Ifa or Isheshe is the other name for it. But in part, I believe they do it because we're vulnerable. We don't have that gnarly feature called free will. It's not as heightened when we're asleep. There's a spaciousness to it, and they can easily bring through, in fact, more information and more direction than when I'm at Trader Joe's, even though they do it at Trader Joe's too, and at the gym, everywhere. It really just depends on your receptivity. But in the dream state, we are quite receptive. In Burkina Faso, the Dagara tradition, that religious practice, when they wake up to have breakfast, they will often ask each other, who came to visit you last night? Talking about what living image decided to pay you a visit and what did they have to share with you? So I center that to now weave in the language of depth psychology as advice to your folks and those you will partner with and support. The psyche is real. The non-material world is as real as we are. The only thing that determines one's experience of that is the capacity to receive it. And often our intuition has been shut down, these sensibilities calcified through religion, fundamentalisms, society at large, et cetera. And so that opening to really receive and be in intimate relationship with the more than human non-material world, it's lacking,
Mhm.
So what the depth psychologists say, in order to become a tender of the deep, which change work is deep work, period.
Period.
I'm gonna just go out on and assert that there. The psyche, you give the soul, you give the psychic terrain, the spiritual dimensions, their own autonomy. Give them the room to be sovereign. And how do you treat beings that are sovereign? If a dream, I had a really potent dream over the moon was in Cancer on Monday, and it was so powerful. And I was like, I'm going to be lazy. I'm not going to write it down this time, even though I've been trained rigorously in the dream tending practice. And that's the first thing you do is you write it down. And that dream bugged me because it's autonomous. It has a message for me. And if I, like any other relationship, am neglectful and I abandon it, it's like, oh, whatever. I don't want to know what you have to say. Big bumblebees that are crawling all over the floor. What are you doing? Write the dream down. So, full transparency, I was up. I haven't slept. I tried to sleep. That's how it works on me because I'm super porous. I've moved myself into another phase, I guess, and it wouldn't let me sleep. So that's an extreme scenario. But for you, the folks that you will partner with and support, just start by taking it seriously. Take seriously the living image that visits you in sleep or waking dream. Don't underestimate the psychic data, the content, the information that it wants to contribute to whatever it is you're doing on the earth. And then if you need help, coalition build, source up with practitioners, take a seminar for a weekend, figure out what the strategy is, get the tools. I mean, I learned the dream tending practice from Stephen Eisenstadt, who was the previous founder of Pacifica Graduate Institute. And he's got a book. He's got weekends. I know he's got an online course. Like, it doesn't have to be a full life commitment, but over time, where you don't know what to do with the thing, seek out those teachers who can learn you a thing or two, as we say in the South, right? Because it has been some of the most incredible outpouring waterfalls. I mean, this course, Value Reformations, is all through dream work and ritual in the waking time. But to give it a somatic lens, ritual and dreams, as well as meditation, they're stimulating similar brain waves, theta brainwave state, a light trance. Plant medicine is also tapping into, along with others, it's not that reduced, but you're shifting your consciousness. You're really widening it when you go to sleep or when you participate in ritual or when you meditate. So yeah, they're real. Take them seriously.
That's right. Amber, as we wind down this session, I always like to ask my movement makers when we think about legacy. 100 years from now, what's your legacy? What have you birthed into this earth through your work?
Wow, that's a really great question. My heart is bringing me toward the thing that doesn't leave me alone, birthing into this moment and for the next 100 years, the remembrance, the power of memory of radical love, especially in the face of cruelty and dehumanization. Whatever identities it's operating through or landing upon, none of us have exclusive rights to suffering. And my hope, what drives me, what wakes me up in the morning, the legacy I've inherited is the radical love tradition that brought my people through, which allows me to be here in this moment.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And may it be so, that radical love. And may all of these movement makers lead with that radical love, because as we know, the only thing that really pushes us forward is love.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Amber, what are ways that people can get connected with you and work with you?
I see. Well, the swiftest pathway is my website, decolonizingthepsyche.com. There's a contact page on there if you'd like to reach out with a message or a note. And my direct email is amber@decolonizingthepsyche.com. And there you'll find all the courses and the lineage healing offerings.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for taking the time. I just am so inspired by you. If there's any way that I can help support you and just be a champion of your work, please let me know. And I look forward to the continued conversation and work that we both are being called from our ancestral line to do.
Thank you, Mackenzie. This was really lovely.
Thank you for listening to The Call to Rise. If today's conversation stirred something in you, subscribe and share it with a fellow movement maker. And join our community at globalmovementmaker.com. Till next time, keep leading with courage, keep weaving ancient wisdom with modern strategy, and always remember to answer the call.